12 million dunam, that is more than half of Israel, nationalized the land that is declared dead land in the past. And there's a lot of trials about it. The high courts, invariably the state wins, because the state has very, very strong lawyers, and the Palestinians that come to the courts are normally cannot marshal these resources, even though truth is with them quite often. And of course, part of the land too, let's not forget, was dead, was empty. Part of the land was empty. Mainly the desert, the Jordan Valley, parts of it were empty. And it's some of my historical work now is trying to actually map for the first time what was the state of the land in 1945. So we found some aerial photographs, British aerial photographs, and we're actually going bit by bit, my post students having to actually digitize all these aerial photographs. So this is how the state concentrated the land. The other side of it is how it allocates it. You know, some communist societies, for example, had agrarian reform. They actually nationalized the land and created a more just system by creating a new distribution. But here, practically all the land, I said 98% of it, was allocated to Jewish settlement and to Jewish uses. First and foremost, the military, which controls about 44% of the land between the Jordan and the sea. The Jewish regional authorities control also a huge amount of land, about 11 million dunams, and some other state uses. And what's interestingly that in the last 5 or 6 years, Israel started a process of privatization. But the privatization is actually almost with all kind of regulations and laws guarded to be Jewish privatization. That is, Arabs almost don't have access to the privatization process, and I can explain the details of it. They can, as individuals, sometimes get into it, but by and large, they secure the fact that privatization does not threaten the Jewish nature of the state. So you have a massive structural process buttressed by the JNF. This is the last piece here. Jewish National Fund, which is an ethnic national organization, that its goal is to settle Jews, to purchase land, control land, and settle Jews on the land, actually became an equal part of the Israel Land Authority. So you can see the decision-making quite often are skewed, not just as Israeli lands, but as Jewish land. And this is a major impediment to the Palestinians, be it in the West Bank or in Israel proper, to achieve equality. Further on that, here is the statistics about the actual numbers of Jewish settlers in the West Bank. And as I said, you know, it climbed over 500,000, now actually over 550,000. And you have, this is, part of it is, this is East Jerusalem, this is the West Bank, and up there we also included the Golan Heights. So it's an ongoing, linear, steady process of colonization, and you see that since the 1970s, really it's very steady. That is, all governments, even the labor and left governments, have continued with the same pace as the right-wing governments. Another important factor is are the economic gaps. As I said to you, this is becoming more and more important, where we have, I call it in my writing, ethno-class inequalities. And this is very stark. This is the GDP per capita in Israel and in the West Bank. And you could see that the gaps existed in the 1970s and 80s, but they widened and widened, deepened in an incredible amount. And at the moment, Israel is already 27,000, this is up to 2005, 27,000, how much? Yeah, $27,000 per capita. So Israel is an economic power, is an economic success. It's an amazing, actually, success. But the gaps with the Palestinians, which, as I showed you, geographically share almost the same space, is, of course, not sustainable. And this is what I call, this contributes a lot to the processes that I'm talking about. Similarly, inside the green line, it's not as stark, but this is from a recent report that we did with the organization Adva about social gaps inside Israel. And notwithstanding the gaps between Western Jews and Eastern Jews, which is a very important process and issue in Israel itself, you would have that structural continuing gap in the last 10 years, and believe me, it goes back from the 1950s, that the Palestinian income within Israel per household is about 65% of Jewish income. This is a huge ethno-class inequality inside Israel too. So these are two main groups of Palestinians, and we can see this also as non-sustainable. This is all to impress on you that the land system and the skewed allocation of land has very direct economic consequences. Because as you know, land is one of the major resources for development. And if you have space between the settlements, if you have the main roads, if you have the tourist attraction, if you have the coast, the ability for economic development is so much enhanced, and yet the Arabs are enclaved in small areas. This is not to say that there is no economic development. Of course there is, but limited, and the statistics show what a structural gap there is. So it is identity, it is geography, and it is economy that is leading us in this stalemate to a process that I see as quite dangerous. And it's important to flag the idea against that we are in a colonial present. We are in a colonial present that Jewish control beyond its boundary, even though it's contested, it's definitely illegal. It's illegal to settle. It's illegal to extract the resources, as we see there. Water, land. Where did we go? Oh no, we have to go on the other side. Water, land, the Dead Sea resources, for example, are forbidden from an occupying power to extract. By international law, occupation itself is not illegal, as you know. Occupation itself, until the conditions are right for peace. The Geneva Convention wasn't written with 50-year occupation in mind. It was to settle conditions after a war, which are temporary by the very nature. So Israel is now using the idea that it's occupied, that occupation is not illegal. Some Israeli scholars even say that it's not exactly occupied because Jordan, the previous sovereign, wasn't actually a legal sovereign. They forget that Jordan actually occupied Palestine after 1947. It is definitely by the vast majority of international scholars considered as occupation and as illegal occupation because of the massive settlement and extraction of resources. And we can elaborate on the international legal point a bit later. The green line, for example, interesting in this colonial situation, is only a border for Arabs who are stopped and cannot actually move usually from the Palestinian side to the Israeli side, not to mention Gaza, which is totally blocked. Right? The green line is not a border for Jews that can travel freely from Israel to the West Bank. So the space has been united for the Jews, but separated for the Palestinians. And then within the Bedouin area in the Negev, there is an ongoing process of dispossession and what I call internal colonization, which is problematic. It's not in an occupied area. It's within a sovereign state. The sovereign state, of course, has more power inside its sovereign area. And this is why it's very difficult for the Bedouins to encounter that. And of course, the situation, as I said, I think is non-sustainable. Within that, I'll move for the last 10 minutes to what can be done. The official wisdom that we have to drive to a two-state solution. And this was gradually, reluctantly, with great difficulties accepted by the majority of both publics, of Jews and Palestinians. And the height point of it was in the 1990s, where the brown shows Palestinians and the blue shows Israelis. And Israelis gradually increased their support for the two-state solution over time. These are Shamir and Shakiki from their book, up to 2007. Not totally updated, but this trend has continued. More Israelis all the time support the two-state solution, including Netanyahu, as I said, in contravention to his policy, to his party platform. Whereas look what happens among the Palestinians. After the Oslo agreement, there is huge support, over 80% support, of something that is also quite surprising, because traditionally the Palestinians were against two-state solution, right? When the PLO started in the 1940s, when they partitioned, they were against it. In the 1990s, they rallied for it, and then it falls and falls, and currently it's still, I saw the last survey, 28% of Palestinians support the two-state solution. So we have a very disillusioned population. Israeli politics go against Israeli public opinion. This is also quite interesting. I marked here colonialist, ethnocratic, and democratic parties. And we can talk about all the details, who is who, etc. But the colonialist parties, in their platform, officially support the ongoing occupation of the West Bank, right? And this, in the last election in Israel, has reached the unprecedented high of 65 out of 120. It's not percent, it's seats in the parliament. 65, this is the highest ever right-wing domination in Israeli politics. So some of us that work with the center of power bemoan the fact that at the moment we don't have a position and we also don't have constitution. And this is where the right wing in Israel really is having quite free hand. We'll skip some of these. Maybe that's important. The campaign, at the same time as the settlement continues, there is an ongoing campaign against the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And these are signs from the last election. For example, the Israel Beitenu party has these signs as this campaign. No loyalty, no citizenship. They campaign to disenfranchise the Palestinians in Israel if they don't declare loyalty to the Jewish state. And of course, as a true dialectical process happens, and that so often happens in history, there is radicalization among the Palestinians, among the Muslim group as well, and they also reply. But when we look at the election results inside Israel, among the Palestinians in Israel, look at this graph. And look, this is the voting for non-Zionist or anti-Zionist parties, which are mainly ethnic Arab parties. And the green triangles are the Zionist parties, which usually typically were of the left, Labour and Meretz and Kadima. And again, the historical process is undeniable. There is huge increase in the parties that are against the Zionist state. These are citizens of the state. These are not under occupation. And a huge drop in those voting for parties that talk about the Zionist state, but perhaps a more democratic Zionist state. So this, again, if you're a scholar, if you're an activist, this is you know, a real danger sign, flickering very hard, perhaps at the beginning of a siren. I wanted to spend a little bit of time about the Bedouins in the Negev, where I've worked in the last 4 years. How are we going for time? It's probably better to...
Well, you run until about 4:15.
Yeah, okay. Now, the Bedouin population in the Negev, which accounts to about 200,000, is really pivotal because they are Israeli citizens, but the weakest group in Israel. And as I said, if we think about colonization and if we think about decolonization or post-colonial situation, we can start with